And here we go. So we'll begin as we often do, whenever I remember, with our introductory story about stories. When the great Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov saw a misfortune threatening the people, it was his custom to go into a certain part of the forest to meditate. There, he would light a fire, say a special prayer, and the miracle would be accomplished and the misfortune averted. Later, when his disciple, the celebrated Maggid of Mizrich, had occasion for the same reason to intercede with heaven, he would go to the same place in the forest and he would say, Master of the universe, listen, I do not know how to light the fire, but I'm still able to say the prayer. And again, the miracle would be accomplished and the misfortune averted. Still later, Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasov, in order to save his people, once more would go into the forest and he would say, I do not know how to light the fire. I do not know the prayer, but I know the place, and this must be sufficient. And it was sufficient, and the miracle was accomplished, and the misfortune averted. Then it fell to Rabbi Israel of Rizhin to overcome misfortune. Sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he spoke to God. I am unable to light the fire, and I do not know the prayer, and I cannot even find the place in the forest. All I can do is tell the story. And this must be sufficient. And it was sufficient. The story I'd like to share with you today is a story that is a very fundamental story in a number of streams of Jewish tradition. It's found in the Talmud and in various versions, and it is the base story for the development of the Zohar. So I've shared it when we've studied Zohar, and actually a couple of years ago, I shared it with the entire community on Yom Kippur. It's a story about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And it's a story about quarantine and studying during quarantine. I thought it would be appropriate for our preparation for Shavuot. And it's a story well worth revisiting, even if you've heard it before. So the story is found in the form that I'm going to share it with you in the Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Shabbat. It was also shared in most of it was shared in Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel's classic gem of a work called The Sabbath, a beautiful short work. I say short as a compliment. That means it's an incentive for people to look at it. It's not a long work. A beautiful book to actually read over Shavuot or any time. And he tells this story also, and we'll see why that is when we get to it. So the story opens with a rabbinic group sitting and discussing things and considering the situation that they were living in. They were living at the time of Roman rule after the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans. And the Romans were not just politically ruling the land, but they were also taking over this landscape and society itself. They were rebuilding Jerusalem to be a Roman city. They were taking over the entire area and putting in Roman cities. Caesarea, for instance, is a place that a lot of tourists have gone to in Israel, and it comes from the word Caesar. So it was a result of the ongoing projects that the Romans engaged in building the land of Israel in their own image. So the story opens as follows. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Were sitting, and Yehuda ben Gerim was sitting beside them. So Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon are major scholars from rabbinic times. Yehuda ben Gerim is an unknown person. He has an interesting name. His name is Yehuda, Judah, but also the name Yehuda is the base name for Yehudi, for a Jew. Ben, son of converts, Ben Gerim, right? And he was sitting along with these rabbis. Rabbi Yehuda opened and said, "How pleasant are the acts of this nation, Rome." So he's praising the Roman occupiers. They established markets, they established bathhouses, they established bridges. So he's amazed by the infrastructure that the Romans have created for society. Rabbi Yossi was silent. Rabbi Yossi's response to Rabbi Yehuda's praise of the occupying authorities is to say nothing. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai answered and said, "Everything that they established only for their own needs." In other words, don't expect that this is because they're so magnanimous, they're thinking for the good of the collective, of society. They established, and the word that's used here again and again and again is the word tiknu. We'll see that this is an important term for later. They established markets to place prostitutes there. They established bathhouses to pamper themselves. They established bridges to take tolls. Some things never change. So what we have is we have three opinions. We have Rabbi Yehuda, who expresses a favorable opinion of the Romans. We have Rabbi Yossi, who his opinion is to play it safe and abstain. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai comes out and attacks the Romans, and he says everything that they're doing is for corrupt and evil purposes, right? They're not interested in enhancing society. They're interested in ruining society. So Yehuda ben Gerim went and retold their words, and it became known to the government. So Yehuda ben Gerim, who was in this group, he goes out. This was supposed to be a private, confidential conversation, and he spills the beans.
Rabbi, is your papers covering something on your computer?
Yeah, it is. How did you get? I'm sorry.
How did you spell his name?
How do you spell Yehuda ben Gerim?
Yeah, Gerim.
Gerim, Gerim.
Thank you.
So,
he was a.
So Yehuda ben Gerim snitches on this conversation. He's an informer, and the government now knows who has been saying nice things and who has been attacking the government. So the government said, number one, Yehuda, who extolled, Rabbi Yehuda, who praised us, let him be extolled. We will give him, promotion. Certainly, we won't fire him from his job. That's not something that they would, God forbid, do. In a real government, you don't do that. Yossi was silent. Let him be exiled to Tzipori. So Yossi didn't join in with the praise. So we are not being fooled by his silence. If he's not a fan of ours, and if he's not willing to raise the flag for us, then that shows that he's not on our side. So we're going to send him away from his community, and he has to be exiled. Shimon, who disparaged, Shimon, who criticized us, let him be killed. Off with his head. So this was the proclamation that was put out. And now Shimon ben Yochai, hears this, so he went with his son and hid in the academy. He runs to the rabbinic study hall. He leaves his home, he and his son, and he hides out there. Each day, his wife brought him bread and a jug of water, and they ate. When the decree became more severe, so when it started to heat up and they really started seriously running after him and making sure that they could find him, he said to his son, "Women are naive. They, meaning the government, the authorities, may abuse her, and she will reveal where we are." So he's afraid that his wife will be brought in for interrogation and that she'll break under the abuse of the Romans, and she'll give in. So he doesn't want to, number one, put her into that kind of position, and number two, he doesn't want his whereabouts to be revealed. So what are they going to do? He went, and they hid in a cave. So this is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Elazar. A miracle happened. A miracle happened for them, and a carob tree and a spring were created for them. So now what they've done is they've gone from any civilized area. They've gone off into a hiding place that's off in some forsaken area, a cave, and it'll be harder to find them. But on the other hand, how are they going to keep going? So a miracle, God makes a miracle for them, and they get their basic needs of water. A spring was created for them, and a carob tree, buxer, the tree that has buxer grow from it, also grew inside the cave. And this was now their basic, instead of bread and water, they had carob and water to eat every day. Carobs are something that when I was a kid, we used to get on Tu B'Shvat, because it was considered a food from Israel. And we would get these dried carobs, and it was considered a treat. I thought it tasted terrible. I hated it. And in rabbinic times, carobs were basically fodder for animals, but they were food. So we have sometimes tragic images today of people reduced in poverty that they have to eat cat food. So that's a little bit of what's happening here. It's a little more romantic. It's a little prettier. It's a tree, and God makes this tree happen to grow. But it's not like God, sends manna from heaven, or Amazon delivers whatever you need, fresh direct. So they're in the cave. They sat up to their necks in sand. By day, they sat and studied, and they took off their clothes. So they only had the clothes on their back, and they didn't know when they'd be able to get out of the cave. So they needed to keep their clothes in good shape. So they basically didn't wear any clothes, and they would bury themselves in the sand so that they wouldn't be sitting around naked. And they studied. They studied Torah together. When the time came to pray, they went out and dressed and covered themselves up and went and prayed, and then again took off their clothes in order that the clothes not wear out. So this is a very interesting distinction that's made here. What the story tells us is that the whole time they're spending their day studying together, and they're naked, and they just basically bury themselves in the sand. But then they have to pray to God. So when they're praying to God, it's not enough for them to sit naked in the sand and bury themselves up and cover themselves up in sand and then pray to God. They get out of the sand, they brush themselves off, they put their clothes on, and then they stand before their Creator and they offer their prayers. And then when their prayers are over, off with their clothes, back into the sand, back to studying Torah together. They dwelled in a cave for 13 years. Elijah came to the opening of the cave. He said, "Who will inform Bar Yochai that the emperor died and the decree is annulled?" So it's a kind of a backhanded way of announcing to Shimon Bar Yochai and to his son Elazar that it's safe to come out. Once an emperor dies, all the decrees of that emperor are canceled, and then it's up to the next emperor to make all new decrees. So the decree, the death penalty that was decreed, this death sentence against Shimon Bar Yochai, is now, yes, exactly, is canceled, and it's safe for him to come out, and for Rabbi Elazar, his son. They went out. So they come out of the cave, right? So let's imagine this, right? They're coming out of the cave. They've been inside a cave for 13 years. For 13 years. And it doesn't mean that they're sitting at the mouth of the cave. It doesn't mean that they're sitting at the opening of the cave and they're looking around at the world every day. They're hidden deep in the recesses of the cave. They haven't seen sunlight in 13 years, right? It's analogous, unfortunately, to some of the stories that we know of people who are incarcerated and who don't know what it means to go out into the light of day. So they went out and they saw men plowing and sowing. So they saw regular life. They saw people going about their business and doing all the things that they need to work the land to get the food. They said, this is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son, they abandon eternal life of Torah and busy themselves with temporal life. So they're shocked. And they say, what's going on with these people? What's wrong with them? What's important? They could be studying Torah. And instead, they're dealing with the day-to-day fleeting needs of this temporary life. Everywhere they turned, their eyes was immediately burnt up, right? So they're so suffused with this power of holiness that they have absorbed over 13 years of isolation, that wherever they look and they're completely upset by what they see, they're basically destroying everything in their path. A heavenly voice went out and said to them, "Did you go out to destroy my world? Return to the cave." So here we have these two people who are so saturated, so supercharged with holiness, and yet God says to them, "This is what I need from you. What good is your holiness if your holiness is destroying the world?" So in punishment, they are thrown back into the cave again. They dwelled for 12 months. They said, the sentence of the wicked in Gehinnom, in hell, is 12 months. So they took it to heart and they said, this is the ultimate punishment. We deserve to be thrown into hell. And this cave where we spent 13 years studying Torah together, becoming so filled with divine power, this same cave is now a hell of punishment for us. A heavenly voice went out and said, go out from your cave. So after the 12 months are over, now a voice from heaven says, okay, you've served your time. They went out. Wherever Rabbi Elazar smote, Rabbi Shimon healed. So what was the effect of this extra time? Rabbi Elazar is still full of righteous indignation. Everywhere he looks, when he's upset by what he sees, when he sees the society operating in this kind of normal way, he can't stand it. And he has the power to look and zap and completely burn up whatever it is that he sees. But now his father is right by his side. And what his father keeps doing is restoring everything that his son has destroyed. Everything that his son looks at and reduces to ashes, miraculously, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai looks at that heap of ashes and brings it back to life and brings it back to its former existence. Everything is restored to being the way it was before. Rabbi Shimon said, "My son, you and I are all that the world needs." So this is an interesting phrase. We'll have to think about that. He says, between you and me, we've got it covered. The world needs both of us, and we are necessary for the world to continue existing. They saw a certain old man. So as they're proceeding along, an old man walking along, running at twilight, holding 2 branches of myrtle in his hands. They said to him, "Why do you need these?" And he said to them, "To honor the Sabbath." So he's bringing some myrtle branches into his home to make the Sabbath day in his home beautiful. They said to him, "Would not one suffice for you? So why 2 myrtle branches? Why are you holding 2 myrtle branches?" Or another way to understand it is, why are you holding the myrtle branches separate? Why don't you put them into one bunch? You can hold them in one hand and that would be fine. Why do you have one in one hand and one in the other hand? He said, one is for Zachor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho. One is for the mitzvah to remember the Sabbath day, to sanctify it. And one is for Shamor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho, to observe, to care for, to protect the Sabbath day, to make it holy. These are the 2 words, Zachor and Shamor, that are found in the 10 Commandments. In the version of the 10 Commandments in Exodus, it's Zachor. In the version of the 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy, the versions are almost identical, but this word is changed. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy is the famous way that we have our the text. But in Deuteronomy, it says, take care to make sure that the Sabbath day is holy. One is Zachor, one is Shamor. So this old man says, each myrtle branch is for me the symbol of a different aspect of how to take care of Shabbat or how to remember Shabbat. Each one of these tells me about 2 different approaches that I have to adopt for Shabbat. Rabbi Shimon said to his son, see how dear a mitzvah is for Israel, and their minds were set at ease. All of the fiery turbulence that was going on in their reactions to the world were finally set to rest by encountering this old man. So this is where Rabbi Heschel stops the story in his book, The Sabbath. And he raises up this story as a beautiful story of a celebration of the significance of the Sabbath. So we could pause here, but I'm going to instead just go to the whole conclusion of the story, and then we'll backtrack and see, hopefully we'll be able to remember the different steps of the story and the different elements and unpack them a little bit. So here's how the story keeps on going. So let's now understand the two men have come out of the cave, they're safe, and they're more reconciled now with being outside, right? They're not full of fury and objection to what's going on out there. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, son-in-law of Shimon bar Yochai, heard that Shimon bar Yochai had returned, and he went out to greet him. Remember, this is 14 years since, 13 or 14 years since anyone had seen Rabbi Shimon and his son. So he went out to see him after all these years. He took him into the bathhouse. So he said, you need a good shower. You need a good bath. You've been stuck inside a cave for 14 years. I think you need a little washing up. He was massaging his flesh. So the bathhouse is not just a place to get cleaned up, but it's also a place to get comfortable and pampered a little bit. And Pinchas ben Yair is doing this for his father-in-law, right? Who's also his teacher, a great sage. And he's trying to help his father-in-law recuperate. He saw that there were clefts in his flesh. So he saw that Rabbi Shimon, from those years in the cave, was basically a physical wreck. He had basically, been, physically, what do we say? Wrung out, and his body was now full of just wounds and creases and he wasn't. Again, think of people who have to recuperate a long time in bed, and then they need so much physical physical therapy because their muscles are shot, their flesh hasn't been exposed to to the sun and so on. So he sees this physical wreck of a human being before him. He was weeping, and the tears were falling from his eyes and hurting Rabbi Shimon. Right, the salt from Pinchas ben Yair's weeping, the salt from his tears was falling into the open wounds. So Pinchas ben Yair is trying to help his father-in-law feel better and get better, but actually what he's doing is actually causing even more pain and suffering because it's so tender, he's so vulnerable, Rabbi Shimon. Pinchas ben Yair said to his father-in-law, "Woe am I that I see you so." So he says, "Oh, I can't take it. I cannot take looking at you and seeing in what pain you're in what kind of suffering you are, and what a wreck you have become. I wish I never saw this." So Rabbi Shimon said back to him, "How fortunate it is that you see me so. For if you do not see me so, you would not find me to be who I have become." So he says to Pinchas ben Yair, "You're looking at what my body looks like. You're looking at my skin and my muscles and my cuts and my bruises and wounds, but you're not looking at what happened inside my soul. You're not looking at what happened to me because of all of that time that I spent isolated studying the Torah with my son. I have changed." For originally, when Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai raised an objection, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair solved it with 12 solutions. In the old days, before this whole episode, before the disappearance of Rabbi Shimon and his son, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair was his equal, if not his better, in Torah study. Whenever Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was in an argument to study some piece of Torah, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair would easily demolish his arguments, would easily answer all his objections. Subsequently, when Pinchas ben Yair objected, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai solved it with 24 solutions. So now Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai has come up, and if you do the math, he's 3 times better than he used to be, right? He is now doubly more sagacious and more acute, more learned than his very, very learned son-in-law. So this happened because of his being isolated for all that time. Next part of our story. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai thought to himself, since such a miracle has occurred for me, I will go and fix something that needs to be fixed. And here's that same word, the word established, that was used before. The Romans, they established bathhouses, they established bridges, they established markets. That word established, which to set it up, also means to fix. This is the word that we use for the Tikkun, Atkin, Takinu. Tomorrow night, when we have the Tikkun Leil Shavuot, that word Tikkun is the same word with all of its various meanings. And it means to establish something and set it forth. It means to repair something, Tikkun Olam, to fix the world. And it also means, when we talk about, let's say, a fancy dish, and we say this dish with all the fixins. So the word tikkun also means embellishments, beautification, make something really special with ornaments and so on. So he says, I need to do something. I need to do something constructive. I need to do something. I need to give back to the world something. I will go and fix something, since it says, and Jacob came whole from Shechem to Shechem. That when Jacob, after he encountered the angel, the wrestling match, the famous Jacob wrestling the angel, then what happens is when he came back to a city, came into the city of Shechem, he came back shalem, he came back whole and restored. And Rav said, whole in his body, whole in his resources, and whole in his Torah. So the idea being that Jacob, had so much to be thankful for. He was healthy. He was able to sustain himself materially, and he was able to be engaged in Torah and to study so much Torah and be connected to that. And he was gracious to the city, right? So what does that mean? When he came into the city, Jacob had all these resources and he was good to the city. He established Tikkun, coinage for them. Samuel said he established Tikkun, markets for them. Rabbi Yochanan said he established Tikkun, bathhouses for them. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, okay, so what about me? Is there something that I can establish? Is there something that I can fix? They said to him, there's a place of doubtful impurity, and it causes trouble for priests to go around it. So this is apparently in the city of Tiberias, his city. And we know that this city of Tiberias was built up by the Romans. And in many cases, they didn't care about what was there beforehand. And this is a story that repeats itself throughout history, certainly in Jewish history, but I'm sure also in other cultures as well, that when a new power, a new group of people come in and take over from an old group, and they want to establish whatever they want to establish, they don't pay attention to what was done before them by the old group and what was sacred to them, what was important to them. They don't care. Certainly, we know in the United States, sacred grounds of the indigenous peoples were meaningless to us. Even however badly we've treated them, there was some kind of effort in the last couple of the last generation or so to start setting aside places that we recognize were sacred ground for those tribes, and if they hadn't been destroyed yet, to at least try to protect them. And of course, the present administration in Washington is against doing that at all. They're interested in decimating all of that protected land right now. But so that's what the Romans did. And the Romans built on top of cemeteries. We know that also happened, for instance, with the Jordanians. After the 1948 war, when the city of Jerusalem was split between East Jerusalem in the hand of the Jordanians and West Jerusalem in the hands of the Israelis, the Jordanians destroyed cemeteries and built upon them and used the gravestones as paving stones. So this is like a standard historical idea of how you show that you're in charge and you're the boss. So now for the Jews, this created a problem because priests are not allowed to go into a cemetery. This is a practice that is honored by many priests to this very, very day. So they can't come in contact with the dead. So now the roads and the neighborhoods and so on have been established in such a way that it would be very difficult for the priests to get around the city without encountering these burial grounds. So this is what they told Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. We've got a real problem here in our city for the priests to keep their sense of ritual purity. He said, does anyone know if there was a presumption of purity here? So this is already a little halachic footnote, and we're not going to dwell on it. But he says, is there something for me to go on? Give me something to start this process. What do we know that where we have something that we know is definitely pure, is not within this shady situation that we're really worried that it's been desecrated. So is there some place that we have or something that we have to start from, a place of purity? A certain old man said, here, in this place right here, Ben Azai cut down lupines of Truma. So Ben Azai made the assumption that this place here is pure, ritually pure. So therefore he was able to take Truma from that place, because you can't take Truma from something that's impure. So that shows that this place must be pure. He did the same. Wherever the ground was hard, he ruled pure. Wherever it was loose, he marked. Okay, so this, we're not going to go into again the details, but what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai does is he finally actually maps out the city, and he establishes the clean areas from the impure areas. And therefore he makes it possible for the priests to know where they have to go and how they can navigate their way around the city. So this was the contribution that he made. Final section of the story. Certain old man, however, said that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he made a cemetery pure. Okay, so no good deed goes, without somebody complaining about it. So there's an old man who's saying, I don't believe it. I don't think Shimon Bar Yochai did the right thing. And actually now what he's going to be doing is he's going to create more problems, and he's going to tell priests to walk along that path. And that path is where a cemetery was. And he's just making the priests sin. Okay, so he doesn't buy what Shimon Bar Yochai accomplished. Shimon Bar Yochai said, if you had not been with us, or even if you had been with us, but had not voted with us, you would have spoken well. But now that you were with us and voted among us, should they say, even prostitutes paint each other, how much more so should scholars? So he uses a parable. And he says to this old man, now you're complaining? You were at the meeting when all of this was certified. You were at the meeting when all of this was voted on, and you actually even voted in favor of it, and you didn't speak out against it. Or if you hadn't even been there, then at least you'd have some grounds for complaining. But you're complaining afterwards, after you heard all the arguments, after you heard my presentation, after you voted for my presentation, after it was all accepted, and now you're spreading complaints, you're disgruntled, and you're trying to attack me behind my back. He said, what kind of honor is there? You know, there's honor among thieves. That's a phrase that we have in our own, parlance. He said that in his time, the phrase was, even prostitutes who are competing with each other for their clients, they help each other groom each other, right? Each one helps the other one look as good as they can be, because there's a sense of camaraderie. There's a sense of professional loyalty. So shouldn't scholars have that sense of regard for each other? Shouldn't scholars have a sense of support for each other? And now you're trying to stab me in the back. He cast his eyes at him. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai gave him a look, and his soul departed. And the old man gave up the ghost. The old man immediately platzed, as they say. He went out to the market. He saw Yehuda ben Gerim. He saw this man who was the informer, the guy who started the whole trouble to begin with. He said, is this one still in the world? He set his eyes upon him and turned him into a heap of bones. So he looked at him, and that was it for Yehuda ben Gerim. And that's the end of our story. That's the whole story. So I know it's a complicated story. There's a lot of elements to it. There's a lot of stages to it. Anybody want to start our conversation going and share some reactions, some insights? You
shouldn't vaporize people unless you're sure they did bad things.
That's it. That's the basic takeaway. All of us that have that power, use it carefully, use it for the right purpose, and otherwise be very, very cautious and circumspect about it. What's the overall theme of this long, convoluted story?
One of the themes I was taken by is the idea that the world needs opposites. It needed the anger of the son and the forgiveness of the rabbi in order to keep going. We don't often see it painted that way in religion. We usually see only the good is needed.
Right. Excellent. So that's really a striking place. It's sort of right in the center of the story.
Yeah.
The story is very artfully put together. We don't have time to go through it in terms of the word choices and also the sections and how the beginning section is mirrored by the end section. I don't know if people noticed that. The marketplaces and the bathhouses.
Yeah,
that's how we start the story, and that's how we end the story. So there's a very, very thoughtful way that the story has been put together, with what Josie was pointing out being a kind of a central peg in the middle, that this righteous, unforgiving anger of the son is really necessary alongside the accommodational approach of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But let's think about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and let's hold that question, that idea for a minute. Did Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai start out that way? Was he an easygoing guy at the beginning of the story? Let's remember, the story starts out because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, yes, Yehuda ben Gerim snitches on him. But what is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's initial approach to what he sees around him?
he's critical. He's railing against these bad people, have whores in the marketplace, and the bath is just pampering. Yeah.
And,
he's very critical.
right. And I want to even say he's not only criticizing what he sees, he criticizes how he understands what he sees. Right? When Rabbi Yehuda, who starts the story off, he says, look at how great modern world is. Look at all this technology that we're enjoying. We can travel from Tiberias to Tzipori in half the time that we used to because of these great Roman roads. The sickness is reduced because we've got this wonderful hygiene now with the bathhouses. We've got food out there for us. We've got so much because Amazon, delivers like right to our doorstep. It's unbelievable. These marketplaces are great. So what does Rabbi Shimon do? Rabbi Shimon says, I want to look underneath. What's the motivation? What are the values that are animating this buildup of society? And that's where his condemnation is total, right? He says there's not a one good value that's motivating, that's pushing the development of civilization as I see it. So that's a pretty extreme opposition. And what's his he needs, of course, he has to save his life. The authoritarian tyrants want to murder him because they're afraid that he's a man of standing and that he's going to get people thinking in the wrong way. Oh my God, can you imagine if, God forbid, people actually started deciding how to live life based on good values rather than just on what their own, convenience is? So they want to kill him. So he has to save himself. But he ends up doing his fleeing takes two steps. Number one, he flees to the house of study. Right? He flees to the world of Torah, where he assumes that the world there is pure, that the world there is completely animated by thoughts of justice, righteousness, goodness, all of the good qualities of humanity distilled into the Torah, which tomorrow night we're going to celebrate receiving. Thank God for the Torah. But then he's afraid that he's going to be vulnerable there too. Right? The long arm of the law is going to be able to find a way to extricate him from there. So then he says, we got to run away. And he runs into isolation, right? Into the cave. And the danger persists for years and years and years. And he has to learn with his son how to survive in the cave. And God gives him one thing: the physical minimal means to survive. God gives him a carob tree and God gives him a stream. But what is Rabbi Shimon going to give himself? What is he going to give his son? What is his son going to give himself and give his father? The answer is they have to study together. Now remember, they have nothing there. They don't have their books. They don't have, Zoom. They don't have, all of that kind of stuff. And nevertheless, the image that we have is for 12, 13 long years. I say 12, 13 because different manuscripts have different time periods, 13 or 12. But for all of that time, they study the Torah night and day, except for when they have to eat, sleep, and pray. Right? So this is their ongoing regimen, but there's a problem. When they finally get out, all of the Torah that they have absorbed is too good for the world, right? Everything that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had been against before, now he's so pumped up in his hatred for compromise and for the material considerations that people make, that not only does he despise the Romans, he despises everybody. So we have this very, very interesting self-critical part of the story where you would think that, soaking yourself in the Torah will make you into a wonderful human being and love your neighbor as yourself, and everything would be great, and he would come out as a truly righteous human being. But instead, he's gone completely bonkers and over the top in really not being able to accept the world at all. So God punishes them and says, go to hell, literally. 12 months back into the cave. So this is where I want to also just think for a second. What's the difference in their experience for Rabbi Shimon and his son between spending those 12 or 13 years in the cave originally and returning to the cave and then spending another 12 months, another year in the cave? Is it all just more of the same? What is it about that extra quarantining, that extra isolation that happens the second time? Is it really just an extra year, just a lengthening of the sentence, or does something really happen to them? Or what's their own sense of what they're doing for that next year? That next year.
I think the year that they did 12 months was they were forced to do it. The original time frame, the 12 or 13 years, they chose to do it. And now the additional 12 months was forced on them. So it's a different mindset.
So it's interesting when you're saying that that's chose or forced, because obviously had they not chosen to go into the cave, guess what? They would have been dead because the Romans would have caught them and executed them. So they chose to go into the cave, but they chose out of running away to save their lives. So it's not like they were also forced. But I think there's a difference in who's forcing them, right? In the first situation, yes, the Romans are forcing them to run away, right? In the second situation, God is forcing them to go in there as a punishment. So how does that change their attitude to what they're doing?
They'd have to evaluate why they're being punished.
Okay, they have to evaluate what's going on here. They have to be a lot more self-conscious about their situation. So in the first situation, they wish they weren't there, but they know that they have to be there to save their lives. But on the other hand, they don't know how long they're going to be there, right? When, if ever, they will be caught, or when the emperor will die and then they'll be safe. It's an open-ended situation. And the purpose is all for the sake of just staying out of the way, right? Getting out of the way of the Romans. And then what they do in that time is their choice. Here's where choice comes in. What Carol said about choice, this is where choice comes in. In the second situation, they know that they're going to be isolated for a year because that's the maximum sentence for hell. So they know that they're in there for a year, but now they also know something else. They know that whatever they did for the first 12 or 13 years and the way they studied Torah was inadequate for the world. It wasn't the way that God found to be the right way, right? God is angry at them for studying the Torah in such a way. Now, it wasn't a waste of time. In fact, they absorbed from the Torah tremendous spiritual power. They had power over the physical world itself and over everyone. They could bring death and destruction wherever they wanted in the name of their righteous indignation, in the name of their righteous devotion to God. That power really was there. But God is angry at them at the way that they're using their power. So when they go back into that cave for that second time, what they're being told is, now refashion your Torah. Learn your Torah, but don't learn your Torah in a way that's going to make the world into just destroyed. That's going to destroy the world. Figure out a way now to fix your own Torah. That word tiknu, takinu, this fixing that we keep on encountering, even the Torah needs to be fixed. Even the Torah needs to be repaired by Shimon and by Rabbi Elazar. Now, when they come out, one of them has learned the lesson perfectly, more than perfectly, because it's not just that when Rabbi Shimon runs around looking, he doesn't destroy the world. He lets it be. But his son, who has not quite yet mastered that lesson, he has actually, Shimon, his father, has to then fix everything that his son ruins. Everything that his son destroys, he has to come back and fix it. He has to restore every single mundane, mediocre, compromised situation of living that makes the world go round. Everything that arouses his son's indignation, which his son then can't control, Rabbi Shimon has to then, in the name of compassion and forgiveness and acceptance, he puts it back together again. So there's this whole transformation here. And now let's go back to what Josie was saying. When Josie said, this is the real shocking, statement. The world needs both of us. Why does the world need Rabbi Elazar at all? Isn't Rabbi Shimon perfectly adequate? Boy, Rabbi Shimon is the one, and he's the hero. And of course, later on, he goes and he uses his powers to fix things. But Rabbi Shimon says we need both of us. What is that synergy that is operating between the two of them? Why is Rabbi Elazar necessary for the world?
He's an extremist. He's like a lot of...
Do we need extremists?
If things are going to ever change, yes, we do need some extremists. Otherwise, nothing changes.
So yes,
there's a danger in that.
Okay.
In their zeal, they may, as he did, destroy what the world needs, as well as what the world needs to get rid of.
Right. So that's a scary idea, and a pretty paradoxical idea. That those extremists, where would we be without them? The people that devote themselves 24/7 to one particular value. The rest of us, yeah, that's a great value. Yeah, let's save the world from climate.
We have to do the laundry.
But guess what? I'm a little busy today. I'll send in my $18 check tomorrow.
Okay.
And all of that is great. All of that is really good. If we all actually did that, then the world would change. But we need the people who are mishugaim ladavar, who are crazy for one thing. We need people who are absolutely extremists for the sake of supreme values. But if we only have them, then the world will burn up. The world will not be saved. The world will not be fixed. We need the Rabbi Shimons to overrule them. We need the Rabbi Shimons to be able to fix it. Who can fix what those extremists did? Rabbi Shimon, who he himself was an extremist. Right? He was in the same boat as his son. And that's one of the things that for Rabbi Shimon makes his son so necessary. His son is necessary not for the sake of the world only, but he sees himself in his son, and he sees that's me when I was young. That's me when I was naive. That's me when I was not quite understanding enough the way I have to be now. But he's pointing the mirror in my face and seeing if I get carried away, then God knows what will happen. So my own son serves as a teacher for me and as a warning for what I am capable of. I'm capable of this amazing misuse of my power, or I'm capable of doing something good. What could that be? What could that be? And how does he find out what to do? How does he find out what to do in order to fix the world? He has to ask the world. He has to ask the people, what can I do for you? What does this city need? So these are just some of the elements that we have in this story. There's so much more to unpack, but I want to wish everyone a Chag Shavuot Sameach Umasbia. May this Shavuot holiday be fulfilling, may be a joyous time, and may we be able to get out of our own caves for the sake of building the world. May we learn our lessons while we're in the cave, maybe be sustained and enriched and learn the right kind of Torah so that when we get out, we can fix everything that's broken. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yashikala.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.